Hello, everybody. Welcome to our listeners. This is the Solidarity Hour with Zachary and Gwen at Rise Above Justice Movement. Zachary Mallory is our founder, and I am one of the co-founders. And we're so happy to be here to just basically do a roundup of, this week's past events. And my gosh, April has already been so wild. And I'm an astrology girl, so they warned us there would be a lot going on, but man, were they right about everything. So yeah, yeah, to kick us off, we had some really devastating storms come through Oklahoma, and we have a lot of incredible collaborators with Rise Above Justice Movement that live there. And Zachary was in touch with a lot of them. So I'm going to pass it to him to start us off today.
So, in a rural area of Oklahoma, last night was 4/23/2026, and we do not know about injuries just yet. And it's 12 o'clock Central Standard Time. This is our typical recording time, just for people to kind of get a little bit of a behind the scenes clip. And we'll be doing some more like behind the scenes stuff too, to showing people the processes of what we do every single day. But yes, I think I'm going to say this correctly. I think it's Enid, Oklahoma, and it was devastated by these storms. And I live in Kansas, and these storms have been astronomically devastating. And with the budget cuts that came to the National Weather Service, it has impacted the states very heavily. Tornado sirens are not going off until sometimes it's too late, if they even go off. And I know in rural areas, those budget cuts are affecting even more deeper and at an even more like alarming rate, necessarily, for lack of a better term. But I want to send out my heart to the people of Oklahoma right now, and then also, all across the country that are dealing with these astronomical storms. The death toll from these storms are rising by the day, by the hour, and oftentimes by the minute, because the more that they discover, the worse it is getting. So I want to send out, my heartfelt appreciation for our collaborators that are in Oklahoma. We'll be sitting down and interviewing Cindy Munson, who's running for or running to be the next governor of Oklahoma next month in May. We'll be sitting down and talking to her. And then, speaking of which, we're also going to be sitting down and talking to your next governor, Gwen. Jerry. Jerry Green is an incredible, I think she's a state rep, right? Is she a state rep?
I believe so, yes.
Either
And
state
she's
rep
right.
or state senator, one of the two. But she talks about cannabis a lot. And I love it. We mentioned this is a really good segue into our first topic of what we wanted to address was the reclassification of marijuana being, a quote unquote less dangerous drug.
And
Um,
psychedelics. They
and
did that to
psychedelics,
psychedelics
yes.
too.
And
Yeah.
while this is a step in the right direction, um, we got a lot more that needs to continue happening. Last week on our weekly series, because we do this every single week, as you mentioned at the beginning, we talked about your friend Afton Bain, who's a current Tennessee state representative, about pot for potholes. Let's talk about that reclassification and what it means, to people who may be listening and kind of like thinking about it. Um, Obviously, we know incarceration amongst like Black and Brown individuals
Yeah.
specifically. I want to highlight that. More importantly, just in mass incarceration in general is obviously a huge issue for profit prison systems. Um, but I have found, I don't smoke very often, but whenever I do, I feel very relaxed and probably better than I ever did like on any of my medications that I was ever on. I'm sleeping better. Um, I, Shameless plug to my mom's spaghetti. Um, we made spaghetti the other night, and we're making it again tonight because it was so good. We're doing a round number two. But Gwen, whenever I tell you I smoked the night before, and I came and we destroyed that pot of
The
spaghetti.
spaghetti.
I am telling you what, my mom, for those of you who have been listening to the podcast, you've been following the movement, you've been listening to me talk about my mom. Last year, she was diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer. Luckily, those scans have come back that her cancer is gone, but she's still going through every 6 weeks
Yeah.
Still receiving chemotherapy, which is called Keytruda, which is for advanced stages of cancer and it's for various different cancers, I believe. Yeah, she does nod at her head. Yes. So definitely something that has kind of opened my eyes a lot with also the healthcare system, which ties in also to, the classification of marijuana. My mom would be a perfect proponent if she could actually use it for like medicinal reasons. She would be an excellent example of who that would like literally help. Um, but let's kind of dive in and talk about what that reclassification looks like and why it's important, obviously, to talk about it because this is a part of our movement is the declassification or the reclassification and the decriminalization of marijuana and psychedelics. This is a very big thing with me, and I know it is to you as well. And I would love for you to kind of talk about that and just kind of dive into that for a little bit and let our listeners know that we need to be paying attention to this.
Yeah, I think it's first of all, it's really important that people know that this reclassification, this has been they've been working on this for a long time. And it's not, I know that the Trump administration, specifically Trump himself, likes to take credit for things, but this is not something that, he did. But also, again, like Zachary said, it's a step in the right direction, but it's not solving, in my opinion, obviously for me, the biggest issue is that, they're going to be, well, I should say the benefit is that they're going to be using this, to like the psychedelics and the reclassification of marijuana will be used for people with PTSD and, veterans, et cetera, in these clinical trials. And then what it also does is it kind of makes way for anytime something happens with the clinical trial, usually like the very ultra rich people are able to access it. Um, More. So I think that's another reason this got pushed through. If I'm just being honest, like ketamine was added to this, by the way. Like I don't know if you know that, Zachary, but ketamine was on the list, and which I honestly don't really understand because psychedelics, marijuana, yes, because I really do think psychedelics when used as like a medicinal or like a way to get over depression, PTSD, et cetera, it does work as well as marijuana. It can be obviously it's much more beneficial, in my opinion, than alcohol.
Mhm.
And the alcohol lobbyists and also big pharma don't like that either.
Right.
Um, but ketamine is a horse tranquilizer. So I don't really understand how that kind of got slipped in, but I have a feeling it's because a lot of these ultra wealthy people are using ketamine, and that's kind of what got pushed through. So with that being said, it as exciting as it is to hear it's going from class one to class three, it doesn't solve the fact that w weed is still illegal. Psychedelics are still illegal for recreational use in this
Mhm.
country, unless your state like Colorado or wherever has legalized it to
Missouri,
a certain Missouri to a certain
surprisingly.
amount. Very surprisingly. So, like, for example, I live in Tennessee, and it's similar to Alabama, where our prison system's some of the worst in the country, and literally slave labor, right? And most of the people who are incarcerated for weed, which is literally a plant, by the way, are Black people and brown people. And there's an amazing documentary coming out called Bar None, and I'm going to the screening of it on Sunday here in Nashville with this edible company called Clara Jane Distillery. And basically, they're talking about how unjustified it is and also hypocritical that of course, the people who are in power and are holding the most money are able to access these things and will never ever go to a prison cell for this. But there's so many people obviously still unjustly in prison that shouldn't be there. So I just want to say that it's so important that, as again, as exciting as it is that they're starting to make moves with these things, and it looks like the alcohol lobbying, it's working to an extent, but still not it's not where they want it to be, So I'm glad people are pushing back against that. But again, it's always where the money is. And I feel hopeful, but also I'm concerned because I don't know if we're ever going to get to a place where we will have all these innocent people freed, because what are
Mhm.
they going to do with they still want their slave labor, right? So I'm almost
Of course.
thinking they just want immigrants from these concentration camps to take that kind of position instead. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Zachary. Like, what do you think might happen in the future with all of this?
I grew up in Missouri, and Missouri has always had some of the harshest punishments. One of the states that has the harshest punishments for marijuana possession, especially like the non-violent offenses. I obviously think there needs to be a lot of work done in this. In Missouri, per the taxfoundation.org, Missouri has a 6% tax on retail sales of marijuana in the state. So that's 6% of the state's, like overall like budget, or
Which is
like what
amazing.
they receive, right?
Right, which is amazing.
However, don't think that that's going towards what we actually need it to go towards. We need it to go towards, I don't know, possibly the potholes that are in the Kansas City area where, well, you might be in Kansas City, but you hit one of these potholes, you're going to wind up north. You're going to wind up in a whole new freaking zip code because of how big these potholes literally are. And they're
Yeah.
like mini sinkholes, literally. And they have taken care of quite a few of them. I don't want to discredit that. There is a lot of work that they have been doing. However, instead of actually addressing a lot of the concerns, we have a housing shortage, we have a housing crisis, we have, veterans that are still sleeping under bridges, and then they want to criminalize them for being unhoused. I
Yeah.
don't use homeless because it has a whole like negative context behind it, but they're unhoused and they're living under bridges, and these are veterans, I mentioned it
Yeah.
on the podcast in a couple different episodes. Um, but we have the tiny homes for veterans that are here in Kansas City. Jason Kander, who is a veteran himself, he ran for Kansas City mayor, but he dropped out of that race due to his own mental health. And I have the utmost respect for anybody who recognizes that and takes care of themselves about how fucked up is it that we still have these same exact issues that we've had for many, many years? And I think I've mentioned this a couple times on this show and then also, just on our podcast and in social media that my grandfather was an Air Force veteran. This is something that is very near and dear to me. And the veteran population also uses marijuana to deal with the symptoms of PTSD. And
Yes.
this is all
Yes, they do.
it's all directly connected. And
Hmm.
they go and fight endless wars, come back home, after maybe possibly weeks or months, and they have nothing to come back home to. you know
Right.
um Sometimes, and this is to say that this happens every single time, but sometimes, a wife gets tired of waiting, gets tired of them, there's so much that goes into this, but oftentimes they
Yeah.
come back to nothing.
It's not
And
like our grandfather's generation who fought in World War II and they came back and had the GI Bill. You get to go to college and have a house, all these things, right? So,
and
yeah.
people join the military to pay for schooling, to pay
Yeah.
for, to help their families out. I know my grandfather did that to help his family out. And also to get his teeth fixed and like to get a number of different things. Like
Yeah. The
it's just
healthcare.
so
Hmm.
astronomically insane about how this country continues to treat veterans, and it literally destroys me every time I think about it. And they are
Yeah.
dying at astronomical rates of suicide. And I think it's 22 every second, I believe it is, or like something like that. But it's an astronomical rate in which veterans are dying by suicide. And I believe that the reclassification and decriminalization of marijuana and expanding the access to those who obviously directly need it. I mean, medical marijuana is obviously a good first step. I would love to see
Yeah.
it fully decriminalized and fully legal, because I believe it would help people like my mom, who's going
Yes.
through cancer. It would help people who deal with PTSD.
Hmm. I
There's a
know it's
number
helped me for
there's a
sure.
there's a
Yeah.
number of good reasons for why we do
Hmm.
this. And thinking about, kind of pivoting for a second, you're currently working on a project that we're going to collaborate with some different like collaborators on this, and it's about the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And I'm going to pop it back to you because I want you to talk about the ERA, what it is, for those who may not know what the ERA is, and why it's important for this project that you are currently working on for it to represent what the ERA is, what it does, and what it stands for, and just why people need to know about this amendment because this is deeply important. And
Yeah,
I
and it's something that,
and
yeah,
really quickly, one last thing to this is the SAVE Act would actually violate this amendment too, and it's
yeah.
definitely it goes hand in hand, and it's intentional. But let's
Yeah.
talk about it.
And it's another reason why, a lot of people don't maybe understand we do have a 28th Amendment. It just technically it's been ratified by all the
Mhm.
states that the number of states that we need to ratify, which is a big deal. This has been going on since the 1970s. But it hasn't been added by the archivist to our actual Constitution. So, I mean, there's like, I forgot which amendment that passed recently that like took 200 years to pass. So, like I said, this has been going on since the 70s, and we had an opportunity to ratify it, but it just didn't happen in terms of putting it in the actual Constitution. So yeah, we need to make sure that happens, but unfortunately, with this administration, I mean, they're not looking to support marginalized people. And I know the Equal Rights Amendment was mainly geared towards women, but for me, it's every single marginalized group. Like, I don't want to give too much away about the project we're working on. And I want to say this so badly, like the hook for what we're doing. But it's like we really, I'll just say like July 4th is not really our Independence Day. We don't really have our Independence Day yet. So that's like what we're kind of working on, and I think it's like important people remember that like we're not all free because we're not all treated equally under the eyes of our Constitution, which was written, of course, by white men. A lot of them were slave masters, and I think that this is a really big opportunity to change that. And we've been collaborating with the ERA Coalition, which is very exciting. I mean, they have a lot of people that are part of them, like activist Jane Fonda and so many people. And then Ariana Presley is one of the sponsors of the ERA. And I know we collaborate with her often as well, and some other wonderful representatives. But it's just so necessary to have the ERA because we're really not equal. Like if you're in any sort of marginalized community and under the eyes of the law, you're really not equal. Um, so I mean, they do have the amendment for, recognizing Black men, but doesn't recognize Black women. And this would, again, every marginalized community would be affected by this. And again, why these people in power do not want this passed, like technically actually put in our Constitution, even though we've already ratified it. So that's kind of where the ERA stands now. And, um, I think if you go to ERA Coalition, you can basically sign something that says, I recognize the ERA, and there's so many signatures, and then they can take it. Um, and they're trying. And I think honestly it's gonna happen. I just don't know if it's gonna happen under this administration. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to recognize that we're getting really close to Juneteenth. And
Yes.
Juneteenth is
Yes.
June 19th, which is a federally recognized holiday as of 2021. And every year, organizations and organizers across the country come together to commemorate this, which, commemorates the end of slavery as we knew it. We do know that certain parts of that do still exist. We see it with the prison industrial complex. We see it with for-profit systems. We see it with a number of different aspects that still exist to this day.
Absolutely.
And we're not free until we're all free. And that includes
Yep.
disabled people like my mom. That
Yes.
includes you. That includes me. Like, we're all in this together. And I want to recognize that Juneteenth is coming up very soon. And as somebody who focuses very closely on social justice, from anywhere from April through like the end of like August is a critical time in the civil rights era. I mean, even before then and like even after that. But Juneteenth, and we kind
So
of go into a lot of like different like history. like history. I'm a
So
history buff,
hot summer
and
months.
yes, and
Yeah.
that's where like the most progressive change did come into play, and I just want to recognize that. Um, there's also, you being from Virginia, I want to highlight something that, and this is kind of along that similar line. There was a headline almost a week ago that the governor, Abigail Spanberger, former congresswoman, um, I have my own critiques about her specifically,
Yeah.
but I do want to recognize me and my mom were actually sitting here talking about this. Um, she recently signed a bill that ends the state tax exemptions for several Confederate organizations. It ended that tax exempt status. I want to talk about why that's important because whew, this is going
Yeah.
to be,
Being a
this is a lot.
Virginia girl. Yeah. There's a lot I could talk about Virginia, but yeah, you go ahead, Zachary. Yeah.
Virginia was a hotspot for for the
A
Confederacy.
huge. And can I just
And
say one thing?
yeah,
But people understand Virginia is a huge state, and top half, the north half, like where I'm from right outside, 10 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. So I'm at that like northern part, the most diverse part of Virginia is like almost like a different state or like country from like the South, because it's literally like the South people have like Southern accents and love like wave Confederate flags, but then the North is like, you have people who work in Washington and are like diplomats and all different kinds of people. But I just want to like explain Virginia. Yeah.
this bill was House Bill 167, which reverses a segregation era carve out in the state's tax code that has benefited the United Daughters of the Confederacy and other pro Confederate groups since the 1950s. This is from the Equal Justice Initiative, and I'm just going to kind of read through this just for a second, like the key parts of it. And the new law remedies Virginia's longstanding support for groups like the United Daughters of the Confederacy or the UDC and Sons of Confederate Veterans. Whew, this annoys the shit out of me
Yeah, they were
because
getting yeah.
there is nothing more. And I realize that this is a controversial topic, but I do not feel represented by a Confederate flag whatsoever. I do not feel comfortable around people who have a Confederate flag in their
Same.
yard. These are people that I need to avoid. Again, like
100%.
I'm I'm going to be the first to say it. And my mom feels the same way about this. We've had many conversations about it, but these are traitors to the United States. These are literal traitors. Again, I know
Yeah.
we're going to catch flack on this. Bring it on. I'm not afraid because I
Well,
stand by it.
I
And
think we all stand by it. People, well, I don't want to speak for everyone who's listening, but I feel like most of our listeners would stand by that. So
yeah, 100%. But sometimes these episodes end up on the wrong side of the algorithm. It does happen.
100%. Yeah.
But we also have a
Well,
block button on our social
yeah.
media. I don't use it very often. I usually do the restrict button, but there's a couple times that I have gotten flack.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we need to treat the Confederate flag like the Germans can treat the swastika. Like they have that in the museum. We can put the Confederate flag in the museum, but you don't need to be waving it from your car, kind of thing.
yeah,
Because
you see these people like driving down the freaking streets and they have their Confederate flag flying, and it's like, oh, you're so proud.
it's so
What are you proud of?
offensive to people who are marginalized and have literally like, you know, it's so racist. Like people, it's not your heritage unless you want to continue your racist
Oh
heritage.
my God. Speaking of which, do you remember this video that went viral? And there was this person that was asking this guy, and he's like this like redneck, like country bumpkin mother. Anyway, I can't come up with names like Jennifer Welch does,
I know,
but
I know. You got some good
Taco
ones though.
Tips. And,
Yeah, you
um,
got some good ones.
I can't come up with names off the top of my head like Jennifer Welch does. Shameless plug to the iPad podcast. They're
Yeah,
incredible women.
we love them.
They're
Yeah.
actually both from Oklahoma. I don't know if you knew that, but
Yes.
they won. I think Angie still lives in Oklahoma, and I know Jennifer moved to New York City.
Yeah.
I'm jealous, but for obvious
I
reasons
know.
and a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But um, I see oftentimes, I live in the Kansas City metro, and I've mentioned it a couple times. I live right across the state line, but even like being in a fairly progressive area, it's like a very liberal area, very heavy in like rich history. The Underground Railroad went literally straight through here. Literally behind where I live at in Kansas City, Kansas, was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman did not come through here, but Frederick Douglass did, which worked in tandem. But it is still a very historic area. But it was also, and John Brown, the
Yes,
abolitionist, was very big in Kansas. And I always say that I do not argue with people that John Brown would have shot. I'm being the first one to say it. I do not argue with people that he would have shot because he knew who the traitors were. He knew, and there was like this whole like battleground between Kansas and Missouri. Missouri was trying to influence Kansas politics. Gee, it's like gerrymandering even existed back then.
100%.
And like the political shenanigans that were going on. But just thinking about this, like I still see like Confederate flags in people's yards, and I'm like, what the fuck are you so proud of? You're proud to be a traitor? Like you don't represent America. This is not who we are as a country. This is
Yeah,
not who we are as a country. And I'll be
exactly.
damned if I let this country go back to that era. Absolutely fucking
Absolutely.
not. No, we're not doing it.
No.
And speaking of which, we don't have to live like that, but we also don't have to live in a constant state of fear of gun violence.
Mm,
Which brings me to the next thing. Louisiana has been riddled with gun violence in the last week. Mass shooting after mass shooting. We learned about 8 children that were shot in
mm,
Louisiana. I want to take a moment and recognize gun violence leaves rippling effects in every community. I used to be a Every Town for Gun Safety survivor fellow. I'm a survivor of gun violence myself, and I have had two of my closest friends shot and killed. One was trying, one had, oh God, how many children did she have? And she had 7 children, and one just started kindergarten last year.
oh my God.
Her name was Taylor Thomas. And then
Mm,
another one was Lakeisha, aka London Taylor, that was shot and killed in 2019. I want to recognize both of them. Lakeisha, aka London, was one of the most beautiful souls that you possibly ever could have had. She was the first person I actually came out to.
oh
I
wow.
was known to her as a little rascal. Um, she used to teachers used to get onto her all the time for like quote unquote like bullying me in the hallway, and she would call me like these little nicknames, but she wasn't bullying. This is how she was. And then she moved
Mm,
away. We lost connection, and then we gained reconnection a couple years before she was shot and killed. And she was killed by her roommate. He went downstairs and grabbed an unsecured firearm and unfortunately shot her in her chest 3 times because he could not take a joke. She made a joke about him not paying rent, and he could not take a joke. He got really frustrated. He got very heated, and unfortunately, she was pronounced dead on the scene. Should have had a trigger warning into here because, well, our viewer discretion is advised. Because what I'm about to touch on can be alarming to some audiences. But in Louisiana specifically, yesterday we learned about 5 people um, in custody after a deadly targeted shooting at Mall of Louisiana, per officials. And this is from 4 WWL. One person died and 5 others were injured in a shooting at Mall of Louisiana in Baton Rouge around 1:22 p.m. Thursday. So yesterday, 4:23. I watched this unfold. It came across while I was recording an episode. The Baton Rouge Police Chief T.J. Morse clarified that there are 6 total victims, one of whom is dead, and 5 others who were injured. Officials initially say that there were 10 victims. In a Facebook post, Lafayette Mayor President Monique Blanco Boulette, I think that's how you say her name, identified 3 of the victims as high school seniors from
mm,
Ascension Episcopal School. During a press conference Thursday night, Chief Morris said the victims' identities will not be released as law enforcement works to notify their families. Shooting was a targeted incident, allegedly. Obviously, there's still investigation going on. The shooting has been considered a targeting or a targeted incident, according to officials. Around 1:22 p.m., police received reports of shots fired in the food court area after two groups of people got into an argument.
Mm.
You can be pro Second Amendment, but you can also be pro common sense. Our Constitution lays it out very bluntly that it also states that a well-regulated militia, right? And the Second Amendment is there to prohibit the government from interfering in your right to bear arms. However, it does not say that you can go out and commit a mass murder and you can get away with it and claim self-defense.
Right. And
That's not what it
also,
says.
right. And they always say, like, when they wrote those law, they wrote the Constitution, we were dealing with
Yes.
muskets, which took like what, like a minute to like
Yes.
load, something like that. Now there's just like these horrifying AR-15 semi-automatic weapons that are just that with silencers on them. Like they've literally like allowed all of these things to be legal without background checks. Like it's so hard to let that sink in, but it's really where we're at, and it's because of the NRA being in, lobbying so hard with the GOP, all that money, and it's disgusting. It's kind of, different, but the NRA, like, it lobbies similar ways that APAC lobby,
Well, literally. And it has so much
and we got both
influence.
sides. We got both sides saying that, yeah.
Yeah.
So
And it has
yeah,
so much influence, and gun violence is preventable. It is a policy choice, and it's systemic failure. We just came up on the anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting, and we're coming up very soon to Uvalde, which that one like severely destroyed every emotion that I had at that
mm,
time. Um, we're coming up on the anniversary of that. We collaborate with Lives Robbed quite a bit,
yeah,
which
yes,
is a group of mothers who unfortunately had their children, or not had their children, but their children were murdered in at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. And I want to recognize that we're coming up on the anniversary of that. We're also coming up on the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016 in
yeah,
Orlando.
in Orlando, yeah.
Christina Grimmie was murdered the night before,
Yeah.
and
Oh, just got
I
chills.
know,
I remember her
I know.
so well. Yeah.
Christina Grimmie had a voice of a literal angel. She was an
Yeah.
angel. And now
Yeah.
she is all of our guardian angels. Like she's a
Yeah.
beautiful human being and always will be.
Yeah. And she
But
was killed by her fan who just came up to
yes,
her at a merch booth and
yes,
just shot her. And I'm getting chills because, as an artist, it's like it's one of your worst fears. You don't want to think like that, but yeah, it
it
was
is. It
very,
is very real, and like jealousy does
yeah.
exist. We saw that in the murder of Selena.
Yes. Selena,
Selena
yeah.
Quintanilla,
Hmm.
Yolanda Saldivar. She's
Mm,
tried to plead and tried to get released, and she's been rejected, which I agree with because
yeah.
you murdered an innocent soul over jealousy. And I know a lot of our Latino collaborators, like Ricky Longoria, aka the Gay Liberal, down in Texas, who's been doing some massive organizing. He went.
Yes.
This kind of segues into this because I want to talk about something that I guess not necessarily like lighter. See what I did there? Um,
Lighter.
Not just because it's one of your songs, but it's which lighter is a survivor anthem. It really
Yeah.
is, and that's what you created it for. And it's a beautiful song. Shameless plug. Gwen, how can people like listen to your music? I want to add a shameless plug in here just for a second because being an independent music artist, I want to recognize that it has not been easiest for you. I've also interviewed several other independent music artists, and there's a common theme that independent music artists are pushed to the side. You're not country enough, you're not pop enough, you don't do enough hip hop, you don't do this, you don't do that, and you're ostracized oftentimes by the mainstream like news stations. You wrote a Barefoot and Pregnant song in 2023 after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which
Yeah.
people can listen to it or they can listen to it on all the streaming platforms and YouTube. But do you want to talk just like very briefly and like give a Cliff Notes version of what it's been like as an independent recording artist? I'm gonna stop saying independent music artist and start using independent recording artist because you are.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
absolutely.
produce and record your own music. Your I almost called him your husband. Your, your
Pretty
partner
much.
Marcus um,
Yeah,
is an incredible, engineer whenever it comes to like music wise. But you've also worked,
incredible.
you've worked with other incredible individuals. But I just want to, I want to highlight really quickly, and then we'll kind of dive in and talk about ICE and DHS and such that's going on. But as an independent music artist, and this kind of turned into an interview, which unintentionally, but I've
Oh,
just done it so
perfect.
much that, but I want to highlight why it's important to recognize the independent music artist the same way as it is to recognize independent journalists, because mainstream, again, fucks people over, and it does. And there's a lot of racism in country music, which we'll dive
Oh
into on a
yeah.
later episode. But there's a lot that, and a lot of misogyny and homophobia, and it's all connected. But as an independent artist, do you want to talk very briefly about what it's been like for you as an independent artist being told your music can't play on our radio station because it might be controversial?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few examples of things that have happened in terms of censorship and I mean, just even on social media, like I can't even advertise Barefoot and Pregnant without it getting flagged because of the content, I guess, you know. And I'm not saying anything, like I don't even mention the word abortion, but I think it's just like, you know, it's a hot potato subject. And
Mhm.
when I released Barefoot and Pregnant in 2023, as an independent artist, um, some of the more progressive country outlets were like not really wanting to touch it either. Because I feel like they're just starting to like showcase artists that are Black and LGBTQ plus, but even then, they're not on the radio. Um, there's so much money that goes into all of these things too. So if you don't have any sort of backing behind you, it's harder to get noticed because again, like the music industry is changing, but especially in country music, it's very patriarchal.
Oh,
We see,
yeah.
yeah, we see how they uphold the patriarchy just in terms of like I think it's like less than 3% or was it 3%? Something like that of women. I would say like it's like 3 to 6%, something like that of women. Anyway, it's extremely low that get played on country radio. And then there's other people arguing, well, we need to stop focusing on LGBTQ plus and people of color and bring the women back. And I'm like, no, it's all connected. So you again are not understanding the problem here. So anyway, as an independent music artist, it's very hard. There's so many guardrails. They keep changing. The other thing that's hard too is like they're always like focus on social media, which I've done for so long. Like I've been working on social media for so long, and you get it too. Like the algorithm, like is changing all the time. They are shadow banning people that are telling the truth. This has happened to a Rise Above Justice Movement account. It's happened to my personal account. So as an independent artist, you're really at the behest of this algorithm because, you know, it's free. That's the free way to promote your music. But then again, it's like they also want you to pay there too. So, um, it's been hard. And there's been like my music video has been submitted places and they're like, you know, I've gotten things back like, oh, this would normally be right up their alley, like this kind of song and everything, but they don't want to touch it. They just don't want to risk losing listeners. And um I wanted to talk about this, like I won't name the company, but there was like a really prominent alcohol company that was going to sponsor my Barefoot and Pregnant release show. And they had a total, I have this email from the person organizing, they're like, they had a total like 360 change of heart and they don't want to be on the poster. They'll send one representative to be there, but they're not gonna be part of advertising it or sponsoring. So it's kind of like, oh, okay. And then I'm kind of sorry, I'm going on kind of a
Oh,
tangent.
you're
And
fine. You're
then,
fine.
you know, I'm a nanny as well, like my day job, you know, because an independent artist, right? You don't have a record label, you're not having this like financial support. So um I applied to this company I used to work for. Um, and I think I stopped working for them like after Barefoot and Pregnant was released, but I had, you know, nothing to do with that. But then I went to get rehired, and they were like, oh yeah, no problem. And then the higher ups ended up saying, no, we're not going to hire you. And they didn't even give me a reason. Like when I asked, and I worked for them for so long and never had any problems. And yeah, pretty sure. And then the email we got back was pretty discriminatory. So, um, and being in Tennessee, these are some of the, it's just the risks you take when you speak out, especially, yeah, in Tennessee and country music. But also that I think of my heroes, like, John Cash, Loretta Lynn, even Casey Musgrave, people who've like spoken out and have been banned from radio stations. Uh, but the thing is, like, they were established artists when they started speaking out. And my first big thing was Barefoot and Pregnant.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of been like a stamp on me. But I'm proud of it. And I hope it encourages more and more artists to speak out. Um, and now I have Jane Wiedlin of the Go-Go's who's doing a cover. And she's like, this is such a fantastic song to have as like your first song. So, again, it's like opportunities have arisen, but also doors have been closed, and
Mhm.
it's okay. So
And
independent artist it's tough, but if it's your passion, it's what you love. I mean, there's no stopping me from doing it, right?
absolutely. Speaking of not stopping from doing anything, I want to pivot for a second because there's a notification, and this doesn't happen very often on this podcast or during the show that we get like live updates from something that's happening with this administration. But most importantly, there was an article that came out just a little bit over an hour ago that Trump's Justice Department, and first of all, I love how they get this correct. This is from CNN. This is not something you expect from like mainstream media, but CNN got this correct because this is not the Justice Department in which it's supposed to function. This is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Justice Department is bringing back firing squads for federal executions. Gwen, whenever I tell you how fucking racist this is, the Justice Department announced
For
Friday it is.
public,
Hold on, you ready for this? The Justice Department announced Friday it is continuing to clear the way for expediting federal death penalty cases, including expanding the manners of execution to include death by firing squad. Under President Joe Biden, the Justice Department reversed much of the work done under President Donald Trump's first administration related to expanding the death penalty in federal cases. I have my own critiques about Joe Biden, and there's a lot of different reasons, but this was something that I did support from him as a staunch person against the death penalty in majority of cases. Um, this Justice Department is bringing back firing squads, which is literally the most inhumane way of execution. I mean, it's inhumane, period. But this is
like,
literally one of the worst.
yeah, here they
Um,
are criticizing Iran for executions, and here we're doing the same thing, just like, oh,
um,
more dignified. No, it's not. No, it's not.
they state that 5 states allow for death penalty by firing squad for those convicted of the death penalty who have exhausted the appeal process. In March, a South Carolina man convicted of a double murder became the fourth person to be put to death by a firing squad since the 1970s. Quote, this is from acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, and he also doesn't understand that they're also shooting blanks whenever it comes to trying to prosecute the Southern Poverty Law Center for doing their job. For doing their job, Gwen,
Yeah.
Southern Poverty Law Center investigates hate groups. That's literally what they do, including the Confederate groups. But now, quote unquote, this Department of Justice is going after Southern Poverty Law Center, which, they do have a lot of issues,
Yeah.
but they're literally
But
doing the
they
best
said
that they
it's because,
can.
yeah, they're going after Christian groups, which is total BS. It's
Yeah,
total
absolutely.
BS. It's like
Um,
you said, hate groups. Hate
and
groups.
per the release and per CNN, quote, the prior administration failed in its duty to protect the American people by refusing to pursue and carry out the ultimate punishment against the most dangerous criminals, including terrorists, child murderers, and cop killers. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said in a statement Friday, quote, under President Trump's leadership, the Department of Justice is once again enforcing the law and standing with victims. They do not stand with victims, as we saw. You cannot sit here and say that you stand with victims whenever you are blatantly covering up Donald Trump's best friend. You cannot sit here and say that you are
Oh,
covering up whenever Jeffrey Epstein was running rampant at Mar-a-Lago, trafficking children.
yeah. The hypocrisy,
Donald Trump
man.
is complicit whenever it comes to the cover up. You cannot sit here and say that you are standing with victims. You are not
Mm-mm.
standing with victims. You're standing with people like Laken Riley. Do not get me wrong. What happened to Laken Riley is absolutely unacceptable, but that person that murdered her has been guaranteed the right to due process and is now in prison.
Yeah, you can't say, oh, this one thing, so we're gonna punish a whole group of people. Like
Like,
then, yeah, then every mass shooter who is a white straight man, are we punishing all white straight men? No.
it's like
It's that same hypocritical
to sit here and
crap.
say that you stand with victims but continue to silence the Jeffrey Epstein survivors
Yep.
and
And say you're never gonna, that's not worth our time. Todd
this
Blanchard's literally said it's
blows
not worth our time.
this blows my mind.
Also, Zachary, do you know why are they so for firing squads? Like it doesn't even seem like it's the most like time or cost effective
Do you
thing.
want me to
If
tell
that's
you
what it
why? Do
is.
you want me
Yeah.
to tell you why? It's
Yeah.
called cruelty is the point. Cruelty
Yeah.
is literally the point
That's what I thought you were gonna
of
say. Yep.
the
Yep.
I it actually costs less. And this it has been literally proven. It actually costs less to have somebody serve life in prison than it does to do an execution. Executions are extremely expensive. And the thing about it is they like to play double jeopardy. And in some states, and in a lot of states, a judge can overrule a jury in like a death penalty case. Um, they do not consult the victims' families. You know, if somebody's murdered, they do not ask that family of what that family would like to have happen to the person who took away their loved one from them. Because there is a difference in having your loved one literally shot and killed or, just murdered in general, various different ways, than it is to have somebody pass away of natural causes. But whenever talking, and I've talked to victims' families, and we're doing a death penalty series with a death penalty action. Ali Sullivan is helping me do this death penalty series, and we're examining different like execution methods. We're doing a deep dive into the history and the Nazi ties whenever it comes to the death penalty.
Yep.
Um, but we're doing a whole series about it, and we're talking about how racism plays into it. We're talking about how prejudice plays into it. There's a lot that goes into executions, and there is a very fucked up past.
And the same people trying to bring it back call themselves Christians. And you
Mm.
know who was a big proponent of public executions and having children watch was Charlie Kirk. Did you know that?
Whoop.
Yeah.
Not ready for
So
that. They're not ready for that conversation, Gwen,
no,
because we
no,
want to sit
he's
here and
on
worship
record
a
saying it.
podcaster.
Hmm.
Um, they're not ready for that conversation. They're not ready for that.
Yep.
I
Yep.
do not condone violence. I'm
No.
going to be the first to say that. I say this as a survivor. However, Charlie Kirk supported what happened to Charlie Kirk, and he literally was on film and on record and literally said, "Gun violence is something that we have to live with in America."
And it's
And
a cost of, they say it's like a cost of freedom or something. Wasn't it
yes,
something like that? Yeah.
yes,
So
and
yeah.
like I said, you can condone violence.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't I do not support political violence literally at all. But if we're going to be against a podcaster, we need to be against those children that are in schools. We need to be against people that are literally walking outside or sitting in their backyard. Oh my
Like
Jesus.
we
And
need to be against them not being gunned down, is what you're saying.
you can't just
Yeah.
you just can't condemn one and not
Yeah,
condemn
you can't
all.
cherry pick like you cherry pick the Bible, y'all. You can't do it.
Mm. That's a whole. Ooh, you know what? We're going to talk about that on our next
We're gonna
episode,
have
on our
to, yeah.
next week, because there's a lot that's happening in like the religious sphere that I want to highlight and talk about. So we'll make that a next big topic. I know we're coming up on time here, but
Yeah.
I wanted to also
Yeah, I mean we pretty much talked about, or there's, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead,
kind of
Zachary.
talk a little bit about where we launched this candidate series, and I've been interviewing candidates running at all levels of office. From the U.S. Senate, I've interviewed Karishma Mansour running in New Hampshire, Alex Reclean running in Massachusetts. Um, I've interviewed, and I have several others like Jackson Franklin in Indiana, who is running in a very Republican area. Um, there's several others that I've been talking with, and I see a common thing is like getting money out of politics. The APAC influence, the super PACs, everything else is going into
With
that.
Citizens United needs
Um,
to get rid of that too. Yeah.
if and that's going to be on our next week's topic as well, is about what I'm hearing about Citizens United and how we get there. I've been taking notes, and I will run you through that about
Yeah, that'd be
what
great.
these different candidates are talking about. And there's also some other talking points. So for anybody who's watching or listening, in the audio form or, via YouTube, we launched this candidate series to give a voice to the candidates because, especially progressive and like non-corporate um, candidates running at all different offices, from school board to city council to mayor to U.S. Congress to the Senate. Even some lieutenant governors and like Oliver Ma in California will be coming on the podcast at some point
Awesome.
very very soon. Um, but just realizing that we have an issue in the country whenever it comes to elections, whenever it comes to campaign finance reforms. If you were older than 2010, you were older than Citizens United. Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision that essentially guaranteed like corporations have a voice in our politics. They have a they have a role in our politics and in our elections, and there's a lot of interference that comes into that. So thinking about that, thinking about a number of different things, but we'll be highlighting that more whenever our next show comes around. But I've been hearing a lot of things, and there's a lot of common themes. I'm taking a lot of notes, and there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of interference. There's a lot to talk about, and how we get there looks different for every person that I've talked to. But there is a common theme: it's getting money out of politics. So, like I said, we'll dive into that and talk about that later on. But as always, thank you so much for doing this show with me. This
Oh
is our
yeah,
weekly
I love it.
series, which we upload to our YouTube in the video form, and then we also do the audio form on our podcast, which you can listen to on um, all of the
All
major
the platforms,
platforms.
all the platforms. Yeah.
And we will see y'all next time. Thank you, Gwen. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah. Love y'all and say your hello, Don
Absolutely.
and doggy.